Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
These stupid telemarketing calls have been coming for months now. Every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. Always the same routine, some guy calling about home repairs, wanting to come to my neighborhood, claiming they can save me a fortune. I've tried everything. I've asked to be removed from their list. I've hung up immediately. I've even tried reasoning with them about how annoying these calls are. Nothing works. They just keep calling. My wife thinks I'm crazy for even answering anymore, but honestly, after dealing with these people for so long, I've developed this twisted sense of entertainment from it. She knows I have a weird sense of humor, and she's gotten used to my unconventional ways of handling annoying situations. We've been married for 15 years, and she's seen me deal with door-to-door salespeople, aggressive retail workers, and all sorts of pushy people in creative ways. These calls always come right in the middle of important client work. I'll be deep into designing a logo or working on a deadline project, and then my phone starts ringing with unknown caller flashing on the screen. I know it's going to be one of these repair guys, but I answer anyway because sometimes it actually is a client calling from a different number. Last week alone, they called me 7 times. 7 times. I started keeping track because it was getting ridiculous. Each time it was the same script about being in my neighborhood soon and wanting to help me with my home improvement needs. I live in a small area where everybody knows everybody, and trust me, there's no roving band of contractors going door to door here. So today, when my phone rang again with that familiar unknown caller, I decided I'd had enough of playing nice. My wife was sitting right next to me on the couch and we were just relaxing after dinner, watching some show on Netflix. I looked at her and grinned. She immediately noticed my expression and asked what I was planning now with a worried look on her face. I told her to just wait and see. I put the phone on speaker so she could hear everything and answered. The caller started his usual routine. He introduced himself and launched into his pitch about home repairs in my area. He explained that his company would be working in my neighborhood soon and wanted to offer me their services. He promised they could save me a fortune on roofing, siding, windows, and anything else I might need. Then he asked if I was interested in hearing about their amazing deals. This was it. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and put on the most distressed, panicked voice I could manage. I cried out that my house had burned down the night before. I told him my dogs had died in the fire. I explained that my wife and I were stuck in a Red Cross shelter. Then I demanded to know what was wrong with these people for calling me at a time like this. The line went completely silent. I could practically hear the guy's brain trying to process what I'd just said. My wife's eyes went wide and she covered her mouth with her hand, trying not to laugh out loud. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. I was starting to wonder if he'd just hung up without saying anything. But then, in the quietest, most defeated voice I'd ever heard from one of these callers, he said something that actually made me feel a little bad. He told me very softly that he hoped things would work out for me. Click. He hung up. The second the line went dead, my wife completely lost it. She doubled over laughing so hard that she couldn't breathe. She was making these weird wheezing sounds and had tears streaming down her face. She gasped between laughs that she couldn't believe I had just done that. She said she felt sorry for the poor guy. I admitted that I knew I might have gone too far. She laughed even harder and said that might have was an understatement. She pointed out that I had told him my imaginary dogs died. I started feeling genuinely bad about it. The guy sounded so sincere when he said he hoped things would work out. Maybe he was just trying to make a living. And here I was, traumatizing him with fake tragedy stories. But then something amazing happened. My phone stayed silent for the rest of the evening. No more calls. And the next day, still nothing. It's been a whole week now, and I haven't gotten a single telemarketing call about home repairs. My wife thinks I've been blacklisted, and honestly, I'm perfectly fine with that. She keeps joking that I should hire myself out to other people who are tired of getting these calls. She suggested I could start a business called something like Traumatized Telemarketers for fun and profit. I told her I didn't think that was a real market. She laughed and said I was kidding myself. She insisted that half our neighbors would pay good money for this kind of service. I think she might be right. Our neighbor mentioned just yesterday that he's been getting the same calls from what sounds like the same company. Maybe they really did mark my number as do not call. Crazy person who's been through enough tragedy. I still feel a little guilty about potentially ruining that guy's day, but then I remember all those interrupted work sessions, all those times I had to stop what I was doing to deal with their persistent sales pitches. They never cared about interrupting my life, so maybe they got exactly what they deserved. Now my wife suggests increasingly ridiculous scenarios whenever we get any kind of unwanted call. She told me that next time I should tell them I've joined a circus and I'm calling from inside the lion cage. Then she suggested I could say I'm an astronaut calling from the space station. I'm keeping these ideas in my back pocket, just in case those home repair people ever decide to call back. Something tells me they won't though. I think I've earned myself a permanent spot on their definitely do not call list. Mission accomplished. 3 years ago, I was fresh out of a messy breakup and struggling to make ends meet in my one-bedroom apartment. That's when my friend showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and tears in her eyes, saying she had nowhere else to go. She'd been bouncing between couches and temporary housing for months after losing her last place. Growing up in foster care myself, I knew what it was like to feel unwanted and desperate for stability. So I said yes. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement turned into the most exhausting 3 years of my life. Things seemed manageable at first. She wasn't officially on the lease because the landlord was strict about additional tenants, but she promised to contribute however she could. She'd slip me some cash here and there, maybe $50 or $60 when she had it, and would pick up groceries or household items occasionally. She even helped with dishes sometimes, though that became less frequent as time went on. The real problem started about 6 months in when she began bringing home what I can only describe as junk. Old bike tires, broken electronics, rusty metal scraps, stacks of newspapers from years ago. She'd pile everything in my dining room, claiming she could fix or sell these items someday. Soon, I couldn't even use my dining table anymore. One day, I'd had enough and decided to clear some space by throwing away a pile of torn magazines from 2019. When I told her I was cleaning up the dining room and mentioned that the magazines were old and damaged, she immediately got defensive. She yelled at me not to touch her stuff and said those magazines belonged to her. I explained that they were falling apart and taking up so much space that we couldn't even eat at the table anymore. That's when she launched into her usual speech about how I didn't understand because I grew up privileged. She said these items were all she had and that I'd never had to worry about losing everything like she had. I reminded her that I grew up in foster care too, and that I just didn't see why we needed to keep broken things. But she insisted it was different, claiming I had better placements than her and didn't know what it was like to have nothing. This became our constant argument. Every time I tried to organize or clean, she'd accuse me of not understanding her situation. But the truth was, I understood it perfectly. I just didn't think hoarding junk was the solution. When months turned into years, her contributions became even less frequent. She'd lost her massage therapy license years ago due to unpaid renewal fees and hadn't worked consistently since. She had a caseworker who helped her occasionally, but she only saw him every few months and seemed to rely on him for everything rather than taking initiative herself. The breaking point came when I realized she'd stopped helping with anything at all. No cleaning, no financial contributions, nothing. Meanwhile, my apartment looked like a storage unit, and I was covering all the bills alone. I finally confronted her about the living situation, explaining that it had been 3 years and I felt like I was supporting both of us while she wasn't contributing anything. She defended herself by saying she gave me money when she could and bought things for the apartment. I pointed out that the last time she'd given me money was 4 months ago, and buying random junk didn't count as contributing to household expenses. She immediately turned it around on me, asking if I was kicking her out after everything we'd been through. I clarified that I wasn't kicking her out, but that this arrangement wasn't working anymore and we both needed to make changes. But nothing changed. If anything, she seemed to dig in deeper, bringing home even more junk and acting like my concerns were unreasonable. I made the decision to move. I found a new place and gave her 2 months' notice, thinking that would be plenty of time for her to make arrangements. She had a caseworker after all, and experience navigating the housing system. When I told her I was moving out in 2 months because my lease was up and I'd found a new place, she casually asked when we should start packing. I had to clarify that I was moving alone and this was her notice to find her own place. She was shocked and accused me of abandoning her. I explained that I was giving her 2 months' notice, which was more time than most people get, and reminded her she could contact her caseworker for help with housing. But she insisted 2 months wasn't enough time, and that I knew how hard it was for her to find places. I'd spent 3 years walking on eggshells, watching my living space become unlivable, and financially supporting someone who seemed to have no interest in improving her situation. Moving day arrived and she still hadn't made any concrete plans. She kept insisting that this was all happening too fast, that I was being cruel and abandoning her. But I'd watched her spend 2 months complaining instead of taking action, despite having resources and support available. The first week after I moved, she called me constantly. She'd tell me she didn't know what to do and was sitting outside the convenience store with her stuff, feeling sick and scared. When I'd suggest calling her caseworker, she'd say he wasn't available right now and ask if she could just stay with me for a few days while she figured things out. I'd refuse, and she'd guilt-trip me by asking if I was really going to let her be homeless after 3 years of friendship. The calls continued daily. Each conversation was the same guilt trip, the same expectation that I would swoop in and rescue her from the aftermath of her own inaction. She had a high school diploma, previous work experience, and connections to social services, but she seemed completely unwilling to take responsibility for her situation. After 2 weeks of constant calls, I stopped answering. It felt harsh, but I realized that every time I picked up, I was reinforcing her belief that someone else would always solve her problems for her. A month later, she tried one more approach. She showed up at my new apartment somehow. She begged me to talk to her and said she'd been sleeping outside for weeks. I asked how she'd found my address, but she brushed off the question and insisted she needed help, and I was the only person she had. I reminded her that she had a caseworker and resources, and that she'd chosen to sit outside a store instead of using them. She complained that it wasn't that simple and that I made everything sound easy because I didn't understand what it was really like. I told her I understood perfectly, but that understanding her situation didn't mean I was obligated to sacrifice my own stability to enable her refusal to help herself. She asked if I was just going to let her suffer, and I explained that I was going to let her handle her own life like an adult. I reminded her she'd had 2 months to prepare, had professional support available, and had skills she could use. She stood there for a moment, probably expecting me to cave like I had so many times before. When I didn't, she left. Later, I learned through mutual acquaintances that she'd eventually contacted her caseworker and been placed in transitional housing within a week. She'd had that option available the entire time but had chosen to guilt-trip me instead of using it. I don't feel guilty anymore about setting boundaries. My husband and I met a few years ago at a coffee shop downtown. He was reading a book about astronomy, and I made some dumb joke about black holes. Somehow that terrible pickup line worked, and we've been inseparable ever since. He proposed last Christmas, and we decided on a small spring wedding with just close family and friends. The problem was his ex. They dated for about 6 months, 2 years before he and I got together. From what he told me, she was clingy and possessive, always going through his phone and showing up at his work unannounced. When he finally broke up with her, she didn't take it well. She kept calling and texting for weeks until he had to block her number. About 3 months before our wedding, she started reaching out again. First, it was friend requests on social media, which we both ignored and blocked. Then she somehow got my phone number and started calling me directly. The first call was weird but not threatening. She just wanted to talk woman to woman about my fiancé. I hung up and blocked that number too, but she kept getting new numbers, new accounts, new ways to contact us. The messages got darker. She'd text about how he belonged with her and how I didn't know him like she did. Then it escalated to threats about making me regret stealing him from her and how neither of us deserved happiness. We saved all the messages and went to the police, but they said unless she made specific threats of violence, there wasn't much they could do. Apparently, saying she'd ruin my life doesn't count as a specific threat. 2 weeks before the wedding, things got worse. She somehow found out where I worked and showed up at my office. Security escorted her out, but not before she screamed at me in the lobby about how I thought I'd won, but it wasn't over, and how he'd realized what a mistake I was. My co-workers were shocked, but I tried to play it off like she was just a crazy person. Inside, I was terrified. We increased security at the wedding venue and gave them her photo, but part of me wondered if we should just postpone everything. My fiancé was incredibly supportive through all of this. He kept apologizing like it was somehow his fault that his ex was unhinged. He even offered to call off the wedding if I wanted to wait until things calmed down. But I refused to let her control our lives any more than she already had. The morning of the wedding, I woke up to 17 missed calls from unknown numbers. The voicemails were all from her, getting progressively more unhinged. She talked about how today was supposed to be her day with him, how she was going to stop this wedding one way or another, and in the final message she said if she couldn't have him, nobody could. That last one made my blood run cold. We forwarded everything to the police and added extra security at the venue, but she had no criminal record, so they couldn't arrest her for making threats. The ceremony was beautiful despite my nerves. We'd chosen a small garden venue with about 50 guests. My fiancé looked amazing in his navy suit, and for a moment, all my worries melted away. This was really happening. We were getting married. The officiant had just asked if anyone objected to our union when I heard commotion near the back of the seating area. I turned and saw her pushing past our security guard, who was clearly caught off guard by her sudden appearance. But what made my blood freeze wasn't just that she was there. It was what she was holding. A large pair of scissors, the kind you'd use for cutting fabric or gardening. She was waving them in the air and screaming about how this should be her up there, and how I'd stolen her life. Before anyone could react, she started running toward the altar where my fiancé and I were standing. The guests were screaming and scrambling to get out of the way. I was frozen in place watching these scissors coming straight at me. That's when my new husband proved that his vows weren't just pretty words. Without hesitation, he stepped directly between me and his charging ex. When she raised the scissors above her head, clearly aiming for me, he pulled back his fist and delivered the most perfect punch I've ever seen. It caught her square in the jaw, just when she reached us. The impact was incredible. She dropped the scissors immediately and crumpled to the ground like a sack of potatoes, out cold. The entire garden went silent except for the sound of her body hitting the grass. My husband immediately turned to me, his knuckles already swelling. He asked if I was okay and whether she'd hurt me. I was shaking but unhurt. Our guests were in shock. Our photographer was still snapping pictures, and our officiant looked like he'd never seen anything like this in 30 years of weddings. The police arrived within minutes. Apparently someone had called them when they saw her enter the venue. The paramedics checked on her while she was still unconscious, but she was fine apart from what would definitely be a spectacular bruise. When she finally came to about 10 minutes later, she was immediately arrested. The scissors, the threatening messages, and about 30 witnesses who saw her attack were more than enough evidence. The officer told her she was under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, making terrorist threats, and stalking. When they led her away in handcuffs, she kept screaming about how we'd ruined her life and how she'd get revenge when she got out. She yelled that this wasn't over and we couldn't keep them apart forever. The officer putting her in the police car just shook his head and told her she was looking at serious felony charges, and the only thing she'd be planning for the next few years was parole hearings. After all the statements were given and the chaos died down, we actually finished our ceremony. Our officiant was a champ and managed to get everyone refocused on the fact that we were there for a wedding, not a wrestling match. When he got to the part about my husband promising to protect me in sickness and health, everyone started laughing and clapping. The officiant even ad-libbed, saying he thought we'd already seen that This groom takes his protective duties very seriously. Our first dance was a bit awkward since my husband's right hand was wrapped in ice, but we managed. The party went on, and honestly, it became the most memorable wedding any of our friends had ever attended. We found out later that she was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, stalking, making criminal threats, and violating a restraining order we didn't even know had been filed against her from a previous incident with someone else. Her bail was set at $50,000, which her family apparently couldn't afford. She ended up pleading guilty to avoid a trial and got 3 years in state prison plus 5 years probation with a permanent restraining order. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was having a mental health crisis, but the months of documented threats showed this was planned harassment, not a sudden breakdown. Our wedding photos are incredible. Our photographer captured the exact moment my husband's fist connected with her face. It's not exactly traditional wedding album material, but we had it printed anyway. It hangs in our hallway right next to our official wedding portrait. People always ask if we regret not having a normal wedding, but honestly, I got to see exactly who I was marrying that day. When it mattered most, when I was in real danger, my husband didn't hesitate for even a second to put himself between me and harm. That's worth more than 1,000 perfect ceremonies. She tried to contact us once from prison through another inmate's family, but that just added more charges to her record. Last we heard, she's not eligible for parole for at least 2 more years, and when she gets out, she's required to move at least 100 miles away from us. Our marriage is stronger than ever. We joke sometimes that we literally fought for our relationship on day one, and whenever we have friends getting married, they always ask us for advice on wedding security. We've become the cautionary tale that made everyone else hire better guards for their ceremonies. The scissors are still in police evidence, but we've been told we can request them back when her case is completely closed. My husband wants to frame them next to the wedding photo. That might be taking the memorabilia thing a bit too far, but after everything we've been through, I'm not going to argue with the man who knocked out a psycho with garden shears to protect me. This happened when I was 16, 29 years ago, but I still smile thinking about it. My family owned a little deli in Midtown Manhattan, and I spent that summer working there doing whatever needed to be done. Mornings and lunch rushes meant I was out on the streets making deliveries, carrying bags of sandwiches and coffee to office buildings. Afternoons, I'd be behind the register, dealing with the usual mix of regulars and tourists. The delivery job was pretty sweet. I got to walk around the city, and some of our regular customers were really generous with tips. There was this one guy who worked at an accounting firm who'd always slip me an extra $5, and this lady from a law office who gave me $10 for a sandwich that cost $6. These people weren't just customers to me, they were the reason I could actually save up some money that summer. When these same customers would come into the deli during my register shifts, I'd always take care of them. If they wanted frozen yogurt, I'd make sure to give them a generous serving. It was my way of saying thanks for treating me well on deliveries. My uncle who owned the place never said anything about it, so I figured it was fine. One afternoon, this regular customer came in, the accounting guy who always tipped me well. He ordered a large frozen yogurt, and since he was always cool to me, I decided to make it extra big. He initially said he didn't want a lid, so I handed him a nice full cup. Then he changed his mind and asked if he could get a lid after all. I grabbed a plastic lid and tried to put it on, but the yogurt was so full that some of it squeezed out the sides and made a mess on the counter. I quickly grabbed some napkins to clean it up, but it was too late. My uncle had seen the whole thing. My uncle was what you'd call frugal. Actually, that's being generous. The man was cheap as dirt. He watched every penny that went through that deli, like his life depended on it. When he saw that yogurt spilling out, he got angry. He started yelling at me about wasting product and asked what I thought I was doing. I apologized and tried to explain that I was just trying to give good service to our regular customers. He told me that good service didn't mean giving away free food, and that I was costing him money with these giant portions. I said it was just a little extra yogurt, but he wasn't having it. He told me that a little here and a little there all adds up, and from now on, he was the only one who could make the frozen yogurt. He said I should stick to the register and nothing else. I thought he was overreacting, but whatever. It was his business, so I figured I'd just follow his rules. But here's the thing. I decided to follow them exactly. The very next day, an old lady came in and ordered a small vanilla yogurt. Instead of just making it myself like I used to, I walked to the back of the deli where my uncle was prepping sandwiches and told him someone wanted a small vanilla yogurt. He looked annoyed but came out to make it. The lady got her yogurt and left. 20 minutes later, another customer wanted yogurt. I went back and told my uncle about the yogurt order. This time he was definitely irritated, but he came out again. This pattern continued for the rest of the day. Every single time someone ordered frozen yogurt, I'd stop whatever I was doing and go get him from the kitchen, the storage room, or wherever he was working. At first, I think he thought I'd get tired of walking back and forth and would just start making the yogurt myself again. But I kept it up. Day after day, yogurt order after yogurt order, I'd go find him. He'd complain that he was busy with inventory, and I'd apologize but remind him that he said only he could make the yogurt. By the second week, he was getting frustrated. The deli would be busy, I'd be handling the register, and then I'd have to abandon customers to go hunt him down every time someone wanted yogurt. It was inefficient and annoying for everyone. He told me the whole thing was ridiculous and said I should just make the yogurt. I reminded him that he'd said he was the only one allowed to make it because I wasted that product. He got frustrated and told me, fine, whatever, just get him when there was a yogurt order. So I kept doing exactly that. Week 3 rolled around and the lunch rush was crazy. We had a line of customers, the phone was ringing with delivery orders, and I was juggling multiple tasks. Right in the middle of this chaos, someone ordered 2 large frozen yogurts. I called out to my uncle that we needed 2 large yogurts. He was in the middle of making a huge catering order for some corporate client. His hands were covered in mustard and he was trying to assembly line about 30 sandwiches. When I called for him, he had to stop everything, wash his hands, come out to make 2 simple yogurts, then go back and wash his hands again to continue with the sandwiches. But I wasn't done, not even close. 15 minutes later, during the peak of lunch rush, another yogurt order came in. I announced that we needed 1 medium chocolate yogurt. This time he was on a phone call with a supplier trying to place an order for the week. He had to put the supplier on hold, make the yogurt, then try to get back to his conversation. I could see the frustration building in his face, but he'd made the rule, so I was going to follow it. The breaking point came about 10 minutes after that. The deli was packed. We had customers getting impatient, the delivery phone was ringing off the hook, and my uncle was trying to coordinate with our part-time sandwich maker who called in sick. Right in the middle of this disaster, a teenage girl walked in and asked for a large strawberry yogurt. I looked toward the kitchen and took a deep breath, then loudly announced that we needed the strawberry yogurt. That was it. That was the moment he finally snapped. He came storming out of the kitchen, his face purple with rage, still holding a knife he'd been using to slice tomatoes. The entire deli went quiet. Customers stopped talking. Even the radio seemed to get quieter. He looked at me with pure fury in his eyes, and in front of a deli full of customers, he screamed at the top of his lungs that he'd had enough and told me to make the yogurt myself, using some very colorful language. The whole place erupted in laughter. Customers were cracking up, and I just walked over to the frozen yogurt machine and made the girl strawberry yogurt like nothing had happened. I handed it to her and apologized for the wait. The girl thanked me and said that the whole thing had been entertaining. After that day, I went back to making yogurt whenever customers wanted it. My uncle never said another word about portion sizes, and I kept taking care of our regular customers the way I always had. I'm a single mom to my 3-year-old daughter. Her dad walked out when she was barely a year old, leaving me to figure out parenthood on my own. It's been tough, but we've made it work. My daughter has always been a sensitive kid. Loud noises, crowds, and new situations tend to overwhelm her pretty quickly. Her pediatrician suggested it might be sensory processing issues, though we're still working through evaluations. The one thing that consistently calms her down is this raggedy orange stuffed fox she's had since she was 6 months old. This thing goes everywhere with us. Grocery store, doctor visits, even to daycare every single day. The poor fox is missing an eye and has been sewn back together more times than I can count, but she absolutely cannot function without it. When my sister invited us to her wedding across the country, I knew flying was going to be a challenge. My daughter had never been on a plane before, and I was honestly terrified about how she'd handle it. I spent weeks preparing her, showing her videos of planes, reading books about flying, the whole 9 yards. I packed every backup comfort item I could think of, but that fox was the most important thing in my carry-on bag. The morning of the flight, I was already exhausted. We'd gotten up at 4 in the morning to make it to the airport on time, and my daughter was cranky from the early wake-up call. She was clutching her fox so tightly I was worried she might tear it. I kept reassuring her that everything would be okay, that the fox would keep her safe on the plane. We made it through security without any major meltdowns, though she did start crying when they made me put the fox through the x-ray machine. I had to promise her 3 times that it would come out the other side perfectly fine. By the time we got to our gate, she was calmer but still holding on to that fox like her life depended on it. Boarding the plane was another adventure. She froze at the entrance, staring down that narrow aisle with wide eyes. I had to coax her forward step by step, and she kept asking if we could go home instead. Once we got to our seats, she immediately buckled herself in and buried her face in the fox's fur. Takeoff went better than I expected. She gripped my hand with one hand and the fox with the other, squeezing her eyes shut tight. I kept whispering to her that we were just going up in the sky to see the clouds, like we talked about. The fox never left her lap. About an hour into the flight, when things had finally settled down, and my daughter was actually looking out the window with some interest, chaos erupted in the row ahead of us. This little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, just started wailing. Not the kind of crying you hear when a kid is hurt, but that overwhelming, overstimulated shrieking that makes everyone on the plane cringe. I felt for the mom. We've all been there. Kids have meltdowns, especially in stressful situations like planes. I was actually thinking about whether I had any extra snacks I could offer when the mom turned around and looked directly at my daughter. The woman had this desperate look in her eyes, and I could tell she was at her wit's end. But what happened next completely blindsided me. She pointed at my daughter's fox and told me that her son was really overstimulated. Then she asked if my daughter would mind sharing her toy for a bit. I actually had to process what she just said for a second. She was pointing at my daughter's fox, the one comfort item that was keeping my kid calm on her very first flight. I tried to keep my voice gentle because I understood she was dealing with a difficult situation. I told her sorry, but that my daughter doesn't share that particular toy because it helps with her anxiety. But there was absolutely no way I was taking away my daughter's security blanket to hand it over to a stranger's child. The woman let out this huge dramatic sigh and shook her head like I just told her I hate puppies. She said that this is why kids today are so selfish. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't respond. I've learned that sometimes it's better to just ignore comments like that. But then she kept going, and what she said next made my blood boil. She leaned toward her friend next to her but spoke loud enough that half the plane could hear. She said that some people shouldn't be allowed to have kids if they can't teach them basic manners. That did it. Here I was, a single mom doing my best to raise a well-behaved, kind child, being lectured by someone who couldn't even pack appropriate entertainment for her own kid on a 5-hour flight. I took a deep breath and spoke loud enough for everyone around us to hear clearly. I told her that if she was that worried about her kid's comfort, maybe she should pack something he actually likes instead of trying to guilt-trip strangers into handing theirs over. The effect was immediate. I heard several passengers say things like seriously and unbelievable. An older gentleman across the aisle shook his head and gave her a disapproving look. The woman next to her scooted away slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. But then the flight attendant showed up. She'd obviously been watching the whole thing unfold from her station nearby. She asked if everything was all right, clearly addressing the situation. Karen tried to play innocent, but the flight attendant wasn't having it. She knelt down next to my daughter's seat with a warm smile and complimented her beautiful fox. She said she bet he was a very good traveler and asked if my daughter would like some special airplane stickers to share with him. My daughter nodded enthusiastically, and the flight attendant handed her a whole sheet of wing-shaped stickers. Then she stood up and looked directly at Karen. She told her that she needed to stop harassing other passengers. She explained that if her son needed entertainment, they had activity books available, or she was welcome to use the in-flight entertainment system. Karen's face turned bright red, and she quickly turned back around in her seat. Her son had actually stopped crying during all the commotion and was now quietly coloring with some crayons his mom finally dug out of their bag. The rest of the flight was blissfully peaceful. My daughter spent the time decorating her fox with the airplane stickers and pointing out clouds through the window. Karen didn't say another word for the remaining 3 hours, though I did catch her looking back at us a few times with obvious resentment. When we landed, several passengers made a point of telling me how well behaved my daughter was and how ridiculous that woman had been. One older lady even said she was impressed with how calmly I'd handled the situation. When we were getting off the plane, the flight attendant stopped me with a smile. She told me that my daughter was wonderful today and that the fox was clearly in very good hands. Karen pushed past us without making eye contact, dragging her son behind her. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.